On March 13, 1997, something enormous blocked out the stars above Arizona, and thousands of people looked up at the same time and realized they were not alone in the sky, not in a poetic way, not in a metaphorical way, but in a cold, physical, heart-pounding way, because what moved silently over them was not a plane, not a helicopter, not anything that made sense. And to this day the event known as the Phoenix Lights remains one of the most terrifying and debated mass sightings in modern history. It began in the early evening when residents in Nevada first reported a massive V-shaped formation of lights moving slowly and deliberately across the darkness, gliding south toward Arizona, and by the time it reached the skies over Phoenix, thousands of witnesses were outside, staring upward, calling friends, turning on camcorders, shouting across neighborhoods as if a silent parade was passing over their rooftops. People described a craft so large it seemed to stretch for blocks, a solid black triangle or boomerang shape blotting out the stars behind it, with bright amber lights fixed along its edge, not blinking like aircraft lights, not flashing like conventional navigation signals, but steady, unwavering, and unnervingly quiet. Some said it moved slowly enough that they could see its outline against the night sky, a dark mass connecting the lights, while others insisted it was a formation of separate objects flying in perfect synchronization. But everyone agreed on one thing: it made almost no sound. No roaring engines, no thunder of turbines, just a faint rush of air at most, like something immense displacing the atmosphere as it passed. Families stood frozen in their driveways, police officers pulled over to watch, pilots in the air reported strange lights moving in structured formation, and 911 operators received a wave of confused calls from people who were not laughing, not drunk, not hysterical, but genuinely shaken. This was not one person claiming to see a flying saucer in a desert. This was a corridor of witnesses stretching hundreds of miles, all describing nearly the same formation, the same direction of travel, the same slow, deliberate glide. Later that night, a second series of lights appeared over Phoenix, hovering and then slowly descending behind the Estrella Mountains, captured on grainy VHS footage that would be replayed on television for decades. A line of bright orbs hanging in the sky before fading one by one as if something enormous were turning its lights off. The official explanation would eventually come from the U.S. military, stating that the later lights were flares dropped during a training exercise by the Maryland Air National Guard, illumination flares that drift slowly as they burn out, explaining the stationary appearance and gradual disappearance. But that explanation did not satisfy everyone, because it did not account for the massive V-shaped craft reported hours earlier, the one that seemed structured, solid, and impossibly large. Witnesses included businessmen, teachers, retirees, teenagers, and even then Governor Fife Symington, who initially mocked the incident in a press conference by bringing out a staffer dressed as an alien in handcuffs, turning the event into a joke, only to later admit years afterward that he too had seen something extraordinary in the sky that night, something he could not explain. Something he described as enormous and otherworldly. Skeptics argue that human perception at night is unreliable, that bright stars, aircraft formations, and flares can easily distort scale and distance, that a line of planes flying in formation could appear as a single object if viewed from the right angle, especially against a dark sky with limited depth cues. And they point to military training routes in the Southwest, where exercises are common and flares are routinely deployed. They remind us that the desert is home to numerous Air Force bases, including Luke Air Force Base, and that classified aircraft have been tested in the region for decades, from stealth bombers to experimental drones, suggesting that what people saw might have been a military project operating under secrecy. But believers counter with the sheer scale of the sighting, the consistency of witness descriptions, the slow speed, the silence, the reports of a solid structure blocking the stars, details that flares cannot explain and that conventional aircraft struggle to match, especially in 1997 technology. They ask how flares could form a perfect V stretching across the sky for miles, how they could move as a single object before separating, how trained observers like pilots and air traffic controllers could mistake simple illumination devices for something structured and massive. Over time, documentaries, radio shows, and internet forums would transform the Phoenix Lights into a cornerstone of UFO lore, placing it alongside events like the Roswell incident, fueling debates about government secrecy, extraterrestrial visitation, and the possibility that humanity has already been observed from above. The footage from that night, though grainy and low resolution by today's standards, carries an eerie weight, because it is not a single shaky clip but multiple recordings from different neighborhoods, showing the same row of lights suspended in the darkness, lights that appear too symmetrical to be random and too steady to be stars. Experts analyzing the tapes argue about perspective, about whether the lights were aligned along a mountain ridge and simply appeared airborne, about whether the apparent hovering was an optical illusion caused by distance and darkness, yet no consensus has ever fully erased the sense of mystery. The psychology of mass sightings adds another layer, because once the first reports spread through television and radio, more people began scanning the sky, primed to interpret ambiguous lights as something extraordinary, and memory itself is fragile, shaped by retellings, by interviews, by documentaries that replay dramatic music beneath eyewitness accounts. But then there are those early calls logged before media coverage intensified, those first stunned voices describing a gigantic silent craft, and the timeline suggests that many witnesses saw the formation long before any news station reported it. Some researchers separate the event into two distinct phenomena. The earlier V-shaped craft traveling across the state, and the later stationary lights over Phoenix, possibly flares, arguing that conflating the two allows skeptics to dismiss the entire event with a single explanation. Others insist that both waves were part of the same unknown phenomenon, perhaps multiple objects moving in coordination, perhaps a display of technology beyond our current understanding. The desert night has always been a stage for mystery, vast and open, where lights travel unobstructed and distances are deceptive, and yet on that particular evening the number of observers transforms the story from a lonely encounter into a collective experience. Imagine standing outside your home, the air cool, the city noise fading, and looking up to see a formation so large it feels deliberate, as if it wants to be seen, not darting away like a meteor, not flashing like a jet, but gliding with patience across the entire horizon. That emotional impact, the feeling of scale, the shared gasps of neighbors pointing upward, is what keeps the Phoenix Lights alive in public memory nearly 3 decades later. Government officials maintain that no extraterrestrial craft visited Arizona that night, that the flare explanation accounts for the most visible portion of the event, and that misidentification and perspective filled in the rest, while UFO investigators argue that the military response was too quick, too dismissive, that data such as radar records were incomplete or unavailable, leaving gaps that fuel suspicion. Over the years, advanced digital analysis has attempted to recreate the positions of the lights relative to the mountains, calculating trajectories and burn times, some concluding that the lights align perfectly with known flare drops, others claiming the geometry does not fully match witness accounts of a connected structure. The debate has become less about a single night and more about trust, about whether governments would admit to testing classified technology over populated areas, about whether they would acknowledge contact if it occurred, about whether extraordinary events are easier to label as illusions than to confront as unknowns. Even today, residents of Arizona who were children in 1997 recall their parents rushing them outside, pointing at the sky, voices tense, cameras whirring, and that memory shapes their sense of possibility, because once you believe you have seen something impossible, the universe feels less predictable. Some scientists caution against jumping to alien conclusions, emphasizing that the burden of proof lies with those making extraordinary claims, that without physical evidence, debris, or clear high-resolution imagery, the simplest explanation often prevails, yet others admit that the sheer number of witnesses makes the event statistically unusual. The Phoenix Lights sit at the intersection of perception and reality, where human senses meet military secrecy and cosmic curiosity, and the truth may lie somewhere in the overlapping shadows. Was it a coordinated training exercise whose flares coincidentally resembled a massive craft, amplified by darkness and imagination? Or was it a structured object using technology we do not publicly understand, moving slowly enough to be observed yet leaving no trace behind? The question persists because neither side has delivered a definitive, universally accepted answer, and in the absence of certainty, the story grows, retold in podcasts, documentaries, late-night radio, and online forums where frame-by-frame analyses continue decades later. Every time someone watches that old VHS footage of lights hovering above the desert, the same chill returns, the same unresolved tension between explanation and wonder. The Phoenix Lights endure not because they prove aliens visited Earth, but because they expose how fragile our understanding of the sky can be, how quickly the familiar can become foreign, how a quiet March evening can transform into a chapter of modern legend. Mass sighting or military test, illusion or encounter, the truth remains suspended somewhere between those fading lights over Arizona, waiting for someone to finally switch it back on.